It was supposed to be just another quiet morning. Ethan barely registered the sound of his car engine humming as he turned onto his street. His body ached, exhaustion pressing against him like a heavy weight after yet another brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital. He had spent the night running between patients, answering urgent calls, and pushing through the kind of fatigue that made time blur together. The only thing keeping him going was the thought of finally collapsing into bed, shutting out the world for a few precious hours. He let out a slow breath, already imagining the comfort of his pillow, the blissful silence that would cradle him to sleep. But as he pulled into his street, something immediately felt wrong. His tired eyes narrowed as they locked onto the sleek black sedan sitting comfortably in his driveway. Ethan hit the brakes, his hands gripping the wheel as irritation bubbled through the haze of exhaustion. At first, he thought maybe he was imagining things, that sleep deprivation was playing tricks on him. But no, the car was real. Unmoving. Parked right in the center of his driveway like it belonged there. He stared at it for a few seconds, expecting its owner to magically appear, apologize, and move it. But no one came. The street was quiet, the car just sitting there, an unwelcome intruder in what should have been his sanctuary. Ethan swallowed down the initial flash of anger. Maybe it was an innocent mistake. A neighbor's guest, perhaps, who hadn't realized they were on private property. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. Mistakes happened, and he wasn't about to lose sleep over something that could be resolved with a simple conversation. He pulled over on the street, which was rare in their tightly packed neighborhood, and took a moment to gather himself. He could have knocked on a few doors, asked around, but he was too exhausted for that. Instead, he reached into his glove compartment, grabbed a pen and an old receipt, and scrawled out a quick note. "Hi there. Just a heads up, this is a private driveway. Please don't park here. Thanks." Satisfied with his reasonable approach, he stepped out, tucked the note under the windshield wiper, and gave the car one last glance before heading inside. His bag hit the floor the second he stepped through the door. He barely had the energy to kick off his shoes before collapsing onto the couch. His body was screaming for rest, and the moment his head touched the cushion, sleep pulled him under like a rip current. What he didn't know was that his peaceful slumber was nothing more than the calm before the storm. Ethan woke to the warmth of the mid-morning sun streaming through his window, his body still heavy with exhaustion but at least somewhat refreshed. He stretched, yawning as he pushed himself up from the couch, ready to finally start his day. But as he stepped outside, his eyes instinctively flicked toward his driveway, and his stomach immediately sank. The black sedan was still there. For a second, he thought maybe he was imagining things, that the grogginess of sleep was making him see something that wasn't real. But no, it was very real. Parked just as arrogantly as before, completely unmoved, as if it had every right to be there. His eyes scanned the ground, and that's when he saw it. His note, the one he had carefully written the night before, was crumpled into a ball and tossed into the bushes, discarded like trash. A slow, simmering anger burned in his chest as he stepped forward, picking up the crumpled paper and smoothing it out in his palm. Someone had read it. Someone had read it and deliberately ignored it. His grip tightened around the note, his fingers curling into a fist as he fought back the surge of irritation threatening to take over. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Maybe this was just some entitled idiot who thought the note was a suggestion rather than a warning. Maybe they needed a firmer message. He turned back inside, grabbed a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote in bold, capitalized letters. Private driveway. Do not park here. This is your final warning, ****. This time, he pressed the note firmly under the windshield wiper, making sure it wouldn't blow away. He stepped back, staring at the car for a moment longer, before shaking his head and heading off to run his errands. Surely, by the time he got home, the car would be gone. But when he returned later that afternoon, bags of groceries in hand, his frustration turned into something much sharper. pure rage, The car was still there, smugly occupying his driveway like it belonged to the very pavement it sat on. The second note? Gone, not a trace of it remained, as if it had never existed in the first place. Enough. Ethan was done being polite. The next morning, he woke up early, pulled on a jacket, and stationed himself outside, arms crossed, watching the driveway like a hawk. He was not leaving until he confronted whoever was behind this nonsense. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then 2. And then, finally, the front door of the house across the street swung open. A woman strutted out, a smug confidence radiating off her like a force field. Short platinum blonde hair styled in a razor-sharp bob, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, her expression one of pure entitlement. Ethan had seen her before, always loud, always acting like she owned the neighborhood, he didn't need to ask. This had to be her car. She marched across the street, her eyes narrowing the second she saw him standing there. "What do you think you're doing by my car?" she barked, hands on her hips. Ethan raised an eyebrow, barely able to believe what he was hearing. Your car, it's been parked in my driveway for 2 days. I've left 2 notes. The woman rolled her eyes and waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that. Yeah, I only parked there because street parking is terrible. What's the big deal? You're not using it all the time." Ethan felt his patience snapping like a frayed wire. He inhaled deeply, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The big deal is that this is private property. My elderly father relies on this driveway to get in and out safely. My wife parks here when she gets home from work. And I need it too. You can't just use it because it's convenient for you." Karen sighed dramatically, as if he were the one being unreasonable. Fine. Fine, I'll move it. She climbed into the car, but before she drove off, she lowered the window and smirked. "You're being a bit selfish, you know." Ethan watched her disappear down the street, his blood still simmering. Selfish. She had the audacity to call him selfish. Maybe now she would think twice before pulling something like this again. Or so he thought. 2 days later, Ethan turned onto his street and immediately hit the brakes. The black sedan was back. This time, it wasn't just parked in his driveway, it was parked diagonally, blocking his wife's car in the garage. Ethan's vision blurred with sheer fury. Enough was enough. He threw the car into park, marched across the street, and pounded on Karen's door. His knuckles rapped harder than he intended, but he didn't care. When the door swung open, there she was again, completely unfazed, her face twisted into an expression of mock surprise. "Oh, it's you," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "What's the problem now?" Ethan inhaled sharply, barely restraining himself. "Your car is blocking my garage. Move it. Now." Karen leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a lazy smirk tugging at her lips. "Look, I'm not going to argue with you every time I need to park somewhere." The driveway was empty. "What's the harm?" Ethan clenched his fists. The harm is that it's not your driveway. It's mine, not a public parking lot. Move your car." With an exaggerated sigh, she stomped over to her sedan, muttering something about people being ridiculous as she backed out. As she rolled down the window one last time, she sneered, "It's just a driveway." Ethan didn't respond. He was done talking. She thought she could push her way into getting what she wanted. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Ethan knew exactly what had to be done. The moment Karen's car disappeared down the street, he went inside, pulled out his phone, and started making calls. If politeness wasn't enough, if clear warnings meant nothing, then it was time for consequences. Within minutes, he was on the line with the local towing company, explaining the situation in clipped, measured words, his patience worn razor-thin. The dispatcher on the other end of the line was almost too cheerful, as if this sort of thing happened all the time. "Ah, a driveway blocker, huh?" The voice chuckled. "Yeah, we deal with these all the time. Don't worry, we'll handle it." And so, the next time Karen's car showed up uninvited, Ethan didn't hesitate. He walked straight past it, dialed the number, and watched with grim satisfaction as the tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, its hulking presence a welcome sight. The driver, a burly man named Logan, climbed out, giving Ethan a knowing nod. "This the one?" "That's the one," Ethan confirmed, crossing his arms. Logan got to work with the kind of practiced efficiency that told Ethan this wasn't the first time he'd towed a car belonging to an entitled nuisance. The heavy chains clinked into place, the hydraulic lift whined, and before long, Karen's sedan was hooked and ready to be hauled away. Just as the truck began to pull out, Ethan heard it, a sharp, indignant shriek cutting through the quiet street like a blade. "You have got to be kidding me." Karen came storming down the street, her phone clutched in one hand, the other jabbing furiously in Ethan's direction. Her face was flushed red with rage, her platinum blonde bob whipping around as she stomped closer. "Where the hell do you think you're taking my car?" she screeched, her voice shrill enough to make a passing dog bark in alarm. Logan didn't even flinch. "Impound lot, ma'am. You'll have to pay the release fee to get it back." Karen whirled on Ethan, her fury practically vibrating off her. You had no right to do this. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." Ethan, entirely unbothered, shrugged. "Go ahead." She did. And for the second time that week, a patrol car rolled up to Ethan's house, two officers stepping out with expressions that suggested they were already so tired of whatever nonsense they were about to walk into. Karen rushed toward them before they had even shut their doors, her words tumbling out in a furious mess. "That man had my car towed for no reason. He's been targeting me, harassing me. I demand you arrest him." The officers exchanged a glance before turning to Ethan. One of them, Officer Calloway, sighed. "Sir, is this true?" Ethan, as calm as ever, pulled out his phone. "Not even a little bit. She's been parking in my driveway without permission for days. I've asked her, multiple times, to stop. When she refused, I had her towed. I have photos, videos, and a copy of the tow receipt if you'd like to see them." Karen's face paled. But she wasn't ready to give up yet. "He's lying," she shrieked. "It's just a driveway. You can't have someone arrested for parking in it." One of the officers held up a hand. "Ma'am, a private driveway is private property. If you were parked there without permission, he's well within his rights to have your car towed." Karen gasped as if they had just informed her that she was being exiled from society. "But I live here. This is a community. He's being unreasonable." The second officer, clearly losing patience, rubbed his temple. "Do you have any proof that you were allowed to park there?" Karen opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. She looked like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she managed, "Well, no. That's what I thought," the officer said flatly. "This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. You'll need to pay the towing fees to get your car back, and I strongly suggest you stop parking in his driveway." Karen glared at Ethan with pure venom, her entire body practically vibrating with rage. "You'll pay for this," she hissed. Ethan just smiled. "I doubt it." But deep down, he knew she wasn't finished. 2 days later, Ethan returned home from work to an absolute joke of a sight. There, sitting smack in the middle of his driveway, was a completely different car, an old, rusted hunk of junk that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. He blinked, his jaw tightening as he took in the absurdity of it. She was escalating. She knew if she parked her real car there, he'd have it towed again. So what did she do? She got a junker, a car that was practically abandoned, one that barely ran, something that would be much harder to tow, Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose, beyond done with this woman's games. He pulled out his phone, snapping photos from every angle. Then he called the city's non-emergency line to report an abandoned vehicle on his property. Unfortunately, the process wasn't as simple as towing Karen's sedan. The officer on the phone explained that because the car wasn't officially abandoned yet, it had to sit there for 48 hours before they could legally have it removed. Ethan could already hear Karen laughing in her house. She thought she had won. Fine. Let her think that. Because he was about to end this once and for all. Ethan knew Karen wouldn't stop unless she was forced to stop. He had already tried reasoning, warnings, and even the legal route of towing her car. Yet here he was, staring at an abandoned rust bucket sitting in the middle of his driveway like some kind of monument to her audacity. She thought she had outmaneuvered him. He would prove her dead wrong. The next morning, Ethan woke to a crisp white envelope taped to his front door. The moment he saw the HOA's logo printed on the top, his stomach twisted with an ominous sense of dread. He ripped it open and read. Notice of violation, failure to cooperate with community standards. It has come to our attention that you have taken actions that disrupt the unity and cooperation of our neighborhood. Parking disputes should be handled with compromise, not hostility. We have received complaints that you have repeatedly escalated tensions with a fellow resident instead of fostering a cooperative solution. As such, the HOA is officially designating your driveway as a shared neighborhood space to promote harmony. Any further, unauthorized, towing will result in fines. Ethan couldn't believe what he was reading. This wasn't just siding with Karen. This was sanctioning theft. The HOA was trying to tell him that his own driveway, his private property, was now community property. His hands tightened around the letter, his vision tunneling with anger. Karen had somehow twisted the situation, painted herself as the victim, and gotten the HOA to back her up. She must have gone door to door, spreading whatever lies she could to manipulate them into turning against him. Well, she wasn't the only one who could play dirty. Ethan marched back inside and made his own calls. First, his lawyer. Then, the local government office. And finally, he contacted every neighbor he actually trusted. By the afternoon, he had the truth. Karen had been making complaints for weeks, claiming Ethan was bullying her, that she felt unsafe in her own neighborhood because of his so-called aggressive behavior. The HOA, rather than verifying any facts, had taken her word at face value and railroaded Ethan without so much as a conversation. That was their biggest mistake. Because Ethan had evidence. Photos, timestamps, video footage from his security cameras, all of it proving that Karen was the instigator, the trespasser, the one who had ignored multiple warnings and gone out of her way to harass him. So Ethan lawyered up. By the time his lawyer fired off an official cease and desist order to both Karen and the HOA, the neighborhood was already buzzing with whispers. Word spread fast, faster than Karen had anticipated. And then she made her biggest, most unforgivable move. A week after Ethan fought back, he came home to another envelope taped to his door. This time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was a foreclosure notice. For a split second, his heart lurched in his chest. Foreclosure? That was impossible. His mortgage was in perfect standing. He tore the letter open, scanning the contents. The document claimed that due to repeated violations and refusal to comply with community standards, his home was being flagged for legal action by the HOA. If he didn't rectify his behavior, the property could be subject to repossessed HOA enforcement. The only problem? It was completely fake. The formatting, the language, it wasn't even a real legal document. Someone had forged it. And Ethan knew exactly who. Karen had gone from being a petty nuisance to committing actual fraud. His hands shook, not with fear, but pure, boiling rage. Within the hour, Ethan had reported the fraudulent foreclosure notice to the Real HOA board, the local housing authority, and the police. He made sure they had copies of everything, the forged document, the security footage, even the cease and desist order Karen had ignored. This time, she wasn't just dealing with an annoyed neighbor. She was dealing with the law. By the next evening, Karen's smug confidence had been replaced with outright panic. A squad car sat outside her house, the officers inside speaking with her in hushed, serious tones. Ethan watched from his porch, sipping his coffee as she flailed her arms wildly, pleading, arguing, shaking her head like a trapped rat. The officers weren't having it. She wasn't arrested, not yet. But she was issued a formal warning for falsifying legal documents. And worst of all for her, the HOA was now under investigation. Because Ethan had exposed them too. In the days that followed, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers about Karen's downfall. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, one she had engineered herself. The forged foreclosure notice had been the final straw, not just for Ethan but for the entire community. When word got out that she had faked a legal document to try and scare Ethan out of his own home, whatever remaining support she had crumbled overnight. Even the HOA, the very group that had once backed her, now scrambled to distance themselves, their leadership under scrutiny for blindly siding with her schemes. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, had become a pariah. People stopped returning her calls, ignored her when she waved at them from her yard, and whispered as she passed. The HOA, now facing a formal investigation for their role in the debacle, was forced to rescind their ridiculous shared driveway policy and issue an apology to Ethan. Several board members resigned, and new elections were announced, this time with a promise of fairness and transparency. But the most satisfying part? Karen's house went up for sale. A bright "for sale" sign appeared on her front lawn within weeks, a silent white flag waving in defeat. She couldn't stand living in a neighborhood where she had completely alienated herself. Ethan didn't know whether she was leaving voluntarily or if the legal troubles she'd racked up had finally caught up to her, but in the end, it didn't matter. She was gone. The first weekend after Karen left, the neighborhood held a small block party. It wasn't official, but people gathered in front yards, chatting and laughing in a way they hadn't in months. Someone even jokingly suggested commemorating Ethan's driveway with a plaque, "The Karen Zone, closed for business." It was ridiculous, but Ethan laughed along with them, knowing that this whole ordeal had, in an odd way, brought the community closer together. As he sat on his porch, sipping a well-earned beer, Ethan watched the moving trucks haul the last of Karen's belongings away. He couldn't help but smirk. He had fought back, defended what was his, and in the end, the right side had won. But one question lingered in his mind: would the next person moving into Karen's house be just as bad? Have you ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor or a power-hungry HOA? Share your experience below, let's see who had it worse.